Good evening, everyone. We're all here. I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country, which is over in that corner. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first regular meeting of the term, our organizational meeting we had, but this is our first meeting, and we have no action items tonight. That's pretty interesting. I don't ever recall this. I don't recall it at all. So that brings us to the assessor's report.
Okay. That was quick. That's a first. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for January 2016. A couple items to note. First of all, the 2015 revaluation, things are on track. We have one more week of informal hearings with the revaluation company the first week in February. We'll have a couple of days the following week for any additional condominium and commercial properties to come in. With that in mind, we are still on schedule, and hopefully we'll sign everything by the end of, sign the grand list by the end of February, and everybody will be getting another notice regardless of whether or not a change has been made. So we'll be sending out another roughly 22,000 notices with their final assessment on them. Okay. There's one other item I'd like to mention, the motor vehicle department. I don't know if you've all been aware, but they put in new software this year. Perfect time to do it for the town of Greenwich. Reval, new software. Needless to say, there has been some issues. So far, so good as far as the town of Greenwich is concerned. We had some expired registrations that we had to take off, but for the most part, I think we've priced the grand list, the motor vehicle grand list. It seems to be okay. The only outstanding issue is there's roughly 100,000 motor vehicles in the entire state that may have been sent to the wrong town. That's roughly 3% of all of them in statewide. So worst case scenario is we may have, some people may get bills from towns in which they don't actually register their car in. The assessor's offices will be taking care of that with our vendor. We'll have ways to just send them automatically to the proper town. Okay? Any questions?
Before, I want to...
question, but I'll address my usual.
Okay.
Going in the right direction.
Yep. One down, one more down.
There's been some communication directed to me, and Ms. Tarkington and Mr. Raymer have seemed to been helping me out, and thank you for your help. Some of the appraisers in town, I think, are just, anxious for the information, and they believe it's supposed to be theirs by now, but I guess it's not. And Amina from the law department helped us out, and I appreciate it. It's really...
Yeah, just so I'm not quite sure what has happened here in the past, but part of the informal process, it's not required. It's not statutory. The only requirement we have is to send out a final notice. So the actual notices that we sent out before are preliminary. The revaluation companies have not released that documentation to me because it's subject to change based upon these informal hearings. So they're not going to put it together until all of that work is completed. And we should have that. We should have it like when I sign the grand list, everything will be available. Okay?
And as for that issue, was a response made to the person making?
Oh yeah, it was more than one person. It was a series of people, and fortunately, I think Mr. Raymer had known some of them, so he said, let me take a look at it, and a formal response came from the law department. Attorney Ahmad did a great job, and your help, and fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I would like to add that Amina been involved, all of you know. Well, it's because the battery must be dead. There's no green light. But anyway, Amina has been involved since the beginning of the revow in terms of making sure that the town is compliant with FOI, as is obviously G. McLaughlin in terms of the overview and presentation. He'll be doing a training session for the BAA, but I believe that there have been many, both written communications and also many visits of these same people in the town offices. For the last couple of months, both Lauren and Bob have been keeping Bill Finger and I very well informed, and we believe have been appropriately representing the town. I'd like to also add, never in the history of the town has so much information been available to the individual homeowners as with this particular revow. The information on their property, at least on a preliminary basis, is online. They can look up their own information. They can look up all their neighbors' information. It's put in order that should be easy for them to understand their neighborhoods, their districts, and and all the sales that have occurred over the last 5 years are also available with that same information. So, change is sometimes good.
Can I get a motion to accept the assessment?
I so move that we accept the assessor's report.
I would second that motion.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you.
Thank you.
Both work? Think I'm going to need one, Dan?
I think it's the cell phone.
I'm so sorry.
You got
That's feedback.
We have to make an announcement to turn the cell phones off, right? Interferes in this room with the, it's the computers also? That's what we were told at the CAP. Right, so if you get that high pitched, it's the result of either cell phone or the computer. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and BET members. I'd like to welcome the new members to your first full BET meeting. Like Michael Mason said, I've been doing this for almost 12 years. I've never seen an agenda without an action item like this. It's a first. We've been busy the last 2 months in finance. We completed the CAFR and the audit on time. And the requirement is to get it to the Office of Policy Management by December 31st. We're also able to take the CAFR and drop it into the official statement, which we completed in December. We were able to go to the agencies in early January, maintain the AAAs for the 3 credit reviewers, and noted in the controller's report, you can see that we got very good rates again, and 88 basis points on the 5-year. I also have been carrying an item in here since September, October of 2013, which is the Parsonage Cottage report. I was glad to announce, going to be glad to announce that the RTM approved it, and congratulate the working group, all of the efforts, and in particular the efforts of Mary Lee Kiernan and Amina. However, if you go to page 6, the first sentence, I used the term "almost finished," and I was somewhat surprised by an email that came through. You could see that with the approval of the Parsonage Cottage loan modification, etc., almost entirely complete. So I got my fingers crossed. An email passed about an hour ago, and hopefully I could take this out of this report next month and we can move on. I'll open it up to any question anybody might have on the controller's report.
So we're going to have a controller's report with no action items next time?
Any question?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you, Peter. That brings us to acceptance of the treasurer's report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 12-0. BET Standing Committee reports. Mr. Norton had audit. Did you have anything?
The only thing, 2 things, the committee met week before last, and there were 2 things I want to bring to the attention. First off, a 5-year contract with their external auditor, which I think is now called RSM, expires with the audit that will be done for the fiscal year ending June 30th. So that at this time next year, we'll be in the process of having an RFP to replace or to have another contract with an external auditor. And the other item that I want to mention is that the committee, when it met a week before last, we received an audit plan for the
this current term for the audit committee, which will be internal audits that we will review going forward. And that's all, Mr. Chairman.
BT liaison? Anything? I don't think I do. Special project teams. Central Firehouse, as I had mentioned, I was going to take over that from Mark Johnson, who had left. So I didn't get a chance to get this out to everybody, but I went on a tour this morning with Alan Manelli through the mega snow piles everywhere. Went on a complete tour of the facility, including sections of the police facility where the connections are made. As you know, there's several connections. The project is at the 65% completion mark. To date, the change orders equal $275,000, or 2% of the contingency, which I believe on that was at 10%. The interior and exterior construction will swing by all trades. They're putting on the old facade on the outside. They're working inside. They're working in every trade, seem to be in full swing. The project completion is now targeted for November. Last winter, if you remember, they did stop work for that 6-week period when the snowstorms were just coming every couple, 3 days. This winter has been so far, up until this weekend's event. The pressing goal right now is to see if we can get the building completed and fire administration in, because the lease that we have at Holly Hill, where the fire administration is, expires at the end of the year. So that's the pressing issue there. But other than that, full progress. You know, I don't see any interims or anything coming from that. That's just a well-run town project, and everything seems to be running smooth. So with that said, that's our central firehouse. New business. I'll call on Mr. Drake for the first item under new business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I talking to my mic?
I don't think your mic is on.
How about that?
No, no.
Thank you. On the topic of the proposed BET procedure for the review of retirement board investments, I propose to say a few things, and then if the chairman sees fit, to open it for a discussion by everyone on the board. You know, the retirement board and the BET, as two boards, have financial duties which were designed, financial duties as regards the approval of retirement board investments. And those duties were designed under the charter to be not duplicative, but complementary. Unfortunately, the way that the BET is executed, our oversight role, has been duplicative and slow and unclear. I don't think anyone's happy with the process. Certainly, Mr. Minarski, I think in our October meeting, stood before us all and said it was broken, the process, which I think is an accurate evaluation of it. So the Investment Advisory Committee proposed a solution in the form of a procedure for the BET that would help us identify, based on the text, the relevant text, what our process ought to be. And so our foundation in this thinking was really two things: the charter, the whole charter section, chapter 14, that deals with retirement, particularly section 208A. And the second foundation was the law department's opinion of September 10th of 2013, written by Mr. McLaughlin, who just joined us. Thanks. Those two documents were our foundation here. And so our committee last term set out to write a procedure, and we wrote one. It was unanimously approved, distributed in December. Now we'll revisit it because we're a new BET and a new committee. But what you have in front of you is really a page of explanation, and a second page, which is a BET procedure, which would find its way into the BET reference book. And just to be real clear, the procedure part of it is the final paragraph of the final page. So the document to be added to the book is a page long, and the procedure is 3 inches long. This had the input of our committee, which passed it unanimously in December, and it reflects work and opinions by the retirement board. It's acceptable to them, and had a good hand and assistance in the creation of it with the town attorney's office, again, Mr. McLaughlin. Our new committee and when we added Ms. Moriarty to it. We, in the new term, we've proposed it as a first reading for the board. And so that's what you have in front of you. It's proposed to be a solution which would clarify the role of the BET under the charter in approving retirement board investments.
Thank you. Ms. Tarkington, did you have something from the law committee on this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The Law Committee, at the request of Mr. Drake after our orientation meeting, did take up consideration of this matter. It had not been originally planned for our agenda, and since we had not had a substantial amount of time to review it, I think the meeting was approximately the next day, we did discuss it. We also had, in addition to Ms. Crumack and myself, Ms. Moriarty also attended the meeting, and of course, we had Mr. McLaughlin there as well as our town attorney, Wayne Fox. We did basically think it made sense to have a proposed BET procedure, so we're supportive from that standpoint, but also wanted to make sure that when this procedure was approved by this BET, that it was inclusive of the issues and the views that I believe that we have been discussing. And amongst those items were consideration perhaps in the section of, and again, this is preliminary, we will hold another meeting, on the investment policy statement and so forth, to at least have the date of the approved policy statement. They didn't, I don't think the law department had that date at that point in time. We also talked about the BET's role in approving the rate of return in the actuary statement, and that has been something that the BET has done both by policy and practice, and we're very much involved 5 years ago setting up the policy that has been executed over the last 5 years. That's certainly something that we've asked the town attorney for an opinion on, and we expect that opinion by our next meeting. And finally, one of the other areas that we raised was also in some of Mr. McLaughlin's earlier memos, and addressed the issues of trustee and custodian. And there appear to be multiple custodians and trustees and so forth on our investments. So we did ask them to, the law department, to review this issue and give us some advice on what should be the procedures for the BET approvals. So we expect to further explore this, and certainly working with the investment committee over the next couple of weeks, the next busy couple of weeks, actually.
Before I call for discussion, if I may, Jean, is there anything that you want to, before our discussion starts, do you want to address in this before we, because I've heard lots of different discussion on this, but I guess we're trying to address something that's been sort of a challenge to us for quite some time. Do you want to wait for discussion and sort of address the questions, or do you have an overview of what we're trying to do here? Can we do it?
Comments?
Yeah, please.
Because Gene McLaughlin, Assistant Town
Right.
Attorney.
And you've been part of all these investment things with us for all this time. That's why I sort of put you on the spot a little bit to help us out.
We did work with Bill in establishing this draft of your procedures in reviewing the investments. And as drafted, it did have our general approval in terms of a procedure. I think the general thrust was which board was responsible for what in terms of reviewing these investments. And when I talk about the two boards, I'm talking about the retirement board and the Board of Investment and Taxation. And there is I think by design of the charter, somewhat of a oversight in this by the BET over the retirement board. It does produce some kind of tension, which I think is probably by design, and promotes some kind of discussion on these items, which always is somewhat healthy in the government process. However, it is taking a long period of time to get through all these things. The retirement board on its own doesn't really have all the resources in its membership looked at in a legal way that can be relied on by itself. We have an unusual retirement board in that the members that have been appointed through our charter process are very well versed in investments. John Chadwick, Larry Simon, and the other members that have been appointed in the past. One of the employee members is actually a former stock trader, very unusual for a fireman. They have as their advisor New England Pension Consultants, and they are not, in the contract it's specified that they are an advisor to a certain extent. I think the retirement board relies a lot on what is given to them by NEPC in terms of advice on the investments. In addition, the retirement board also has an actuary, an enrolled actuary that gives them advice. When it comes before your board, the way it comes before you is to really review the investment agreements. That's reviewed by the law department and by this board. And in some cases, I think this has been one of the discussions about this, is the approval of a trustee for the investment. The charter really gives the retirement board two options. One is that you can set up a custodian like State Street, and then investment managers. In that case, the retirement board does all the investments. That's probably closer to the model that we have at the moment. The other model, or the other option in the charter, is that the entire corpus of the retirement funds can be turned over to a corporation trustee. And that, the charter language is that when you do that option, that corporation trustee is approved by this board, the Board of Investment and Taxation. So in the process of approving the agreements, and sometimes even in the option that the retirement board is getting into at the moment, some of these alternative investments are investments, for example, in trusts, limited partnership agreements, LLCs. There is a trustee to some extent. Is the Board of Investment and Taxation really getting involved in approval of that trustee? I think the practice has been that in approving the agreements, the Board of Investment and Taxation is at least looking to some extent at that trustee, but more in reviewing the entire agreements. These agreements are complex. There are prospectuses involved, private placement memorandums. We negotiate side letters. But as far as the professional insight of an investment manager or an actuary, that kind of advice has really been given to the retirement board by its professionals. So I think what the policy was trying to do was to kind of separate the roles. I think that it did a good job. It's satisfactory from our standpoint. There has been some discussion about this trustee business, about which option we're going to. Should that be expressed more in the policy? We'll probably have more comment on that from the law committee. But overall, I thought that it was a good effort. Jeff Raymer had some questions about it that we responded to. And so I think it's ready for your considerations. I understand this is a first read, and we'll certainly welcome any questions or comments that you have through committee or otherwise.
Thank you. Discussion now. Mr. Raymer, followed by Ms. Tarkenton.
Let me say at the outset that I have a high regard for the effort that Bill has put into this. I have a high regard for Bill individually as well. To my mind, the wording of what was proposed was perhaps not ideal. And I, for one, would like to see this looked at, maybe massaged to some extent. My own personal point of view is that I think actually the wording of Section 208A of the Charter is not ideal. And I actually think that the resolution of the problems here might be actually more in the nature of making some revision to the Charter itself, not just having a policy statement. I'd welcome if the chair, in its wisdom, were to think it's appropriate to set up a committee to perhaps look at this and come back at the next meeting or a future meeting with some suggestions, either adopting what Bill has done or proposing some changes to it. My own particular concerns, I was finding variation between the wording of this particular provision being proposed by Bill, a variation between that and what I saw in the Charter. Most particularly for me, it had seemed to me that Bill's suggestion here focused overly on just one piece of the BET's responsibility, and that is the approval of agreements, and seemed to treat the BET's role as being only one of approving agreements. Whereas to my mind, Section 208A is quite clear that in the instance in which the retirement board wishes to allocate, Gene, not just a whole, but also a part, it says, if any part of the portfolio is to be turned over to what the Charter calls a corporation trustee to administer that piece or whole of the portfolio on behalf of the retirement board, then the entity is to be an entity which is designated by the BET, not by the retirement board, although the BET can certainly welcome the request and suggestions of the retirement board in making that designation. Secondly, it seemed plain to me that there were two other features to Section 208A, both of which were rather forcefully given to us by the RTM, and I think that it needs to have a certain respect of the BET towards what our colleague, the RTM, asks of us. We at a prior time did make a revision of Section 208A, and we had removed from Section 208A a provision that said that 40% of the portfolio will be restricted to investments which are approved by the state of Connecticut for state-chartered insurance companies and state-chartered banks. We stripped that language and left the restriction open, unrestricted. And the RTM, if you recall, came back to us with a provision that said, first of all, no, your investments have to meet the standard of a prudent investor. And then secondly, it reinstilled a restriction, although at 25%, not 40%, and said that that shall be invested only in fixed income securities or cash. And most particularly did not allow investment in other kinds of investments such as equities, property, real property, and the like. And I took that as being language from the RTM that they wanted that 25% to be conservatively invested, and I think that too forms a standard that we're obliged to pay attention to. So I viewed the responsibility of the BET to be fourfold. One, that we designate who the corporation trustee is if the retirement board wants to use such a person. Secondly, that we approve the agreement. That's the piece of it that Mr. Drake did pick up in his provision. And thirdly, that we have an independent obligation to be paying attention to the responsibility that the prudent investor standard should be met, as well as the restrictions on the 25%. And because those things are not picked up in Mr. Drake's wording, I thought that perhaps some improvement could be made in the wording of that, and that's the reason why I'd like to see this referred to a committee. I don't mean to impose my services in any way, but if the chair is suffering for finding people who are willing to serve on such a committee, I certainly would be willing to serve on such a committee and had so indicated to the chair on an earlier occasion. But I don't insist on doing so. I would welcome the effort of any of my colleagues in this regard. But I would like to see this matter continued, if we may, to a future meeting, hopefully for such a committee to be set up, and then to have a report come back on perhaps some slight improvements that could be made to the item that's before us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Arrington?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I respectfully would like to comment here that we do already have two committees of this board, the Investment Advisory Committee and the Law Committee. And certainly Mr. Raymer, as well as any other BET member, are always welcome certainly as chair of the law committee, at the law committee meetings, and I'm sure Mr. Drake feels the same way about the investment advisory committee. But I would like to comment on one thing that I thought Mr. McLaughlin sort of moved over pretty quickly, and I don't have the same point of view, and that is the responsibility, the actuary rate of return. Clearly, there was a section in the charter that was section 205H, if I'm correct, and it clearly gave the BET responsibility. I think when the BET agreed to an amendment that the retirement board requested from the BET, it didn't understand the full implications of that. Certainly, there's a practice and of us approving this, and so we have asked the law department to certainly continue to review this and to opine on this practice, which gives the BET the responsibility of approval that I believe that that the BET continues to hold. I would also like to comment, Mr. Raymer, swept over the section and brought it up. I think he probably has it on some other point too, the trustees. And I think that's, again, going to be an ongoing conversation. And the bottom line is, although Mr. McLaughlin raised this, that the law committee has recommended the documents to be in legal order again and again on these investments. But quite frankly, I think it's fair to say that the law committee members, both Mr. Raymer and I previously, as well as input from the law department, didn't really focus on this particular aspect, and perhaps we need to go back and look at that once again and review the manner in which some of these things have been approved to make sure that they are in legal order. So again, I think that another point that Mr. Raymer raised about the retirement board's responsibility to exercise the prudent investor standard is very important. And I think that working together with the Investment Advisory Committee Chairman, we need to make sure that we set up our procedures, that they are all inclusive of the responsibilities that the board has on this matter. Thank you.
Ms. Murray?
This one? You want this one?
It doesn't. Okay, sorry. I'm the lone new member on the Investment Advisory Committee, so I just wanted to communicate a little bit about the discussion that we had at our meeting, because we didn't vote on the merits of this draft at the new Investment Advisory. And I think that where some of the concerns that you're hearing amongst other BET members I share, I would like to have this document be a better statement of really what the full role of the BET is related to the retirement board and what the retirement board's responsibilities are per the current charter. I think the issue of charter change merits discussion, but I'm not sure it's covered by what this proposal is trying to accomplish. And so I think there's some definitional issues about the trustee, and then there's some better clarification we can get here on what the real roles are in terms of what we should be approving on and how to expedite that role and that process, and what the retirement board's responsibilities are.
Ms. Wesson?
Hello? Is that on? Yes, I'm sorry. I just wanted to thank Mr. Drake and the members of the Investment Advisory Committee for the work that they've started on here. I mean, I would agree with Mr. Marnarski that the process that we've gone through over the last, certainly my tenure on the BET has been broken, and that we have a lack of clarity in terms of the roles of both the Retirement Board as well as the Investment Advisory Committee. So I would definitely look forward to the additional work that the IAC is going to do, as well as the Law Committee. And I think that I'm confident that they'll result in an improvement and further clarification of what our roles and responsibilities are.
Jean, can I ask you a question or two? Broadly, my question is, how does the new proposed policy square with the practice that we've been undertaking to date? So we have certainly utilized in the past the law department and the law committee to opine as to whether these investments are in legal order, and then that what I call the sort of legal order strand of our approval. And then there's been another strand of approval that has gone from the IAC committee up to the full BET, which is encompass some of the elements that you heard from Mr. Raymer, including the fact that, for example, with private equity investments, we are entrusting a portion of the portfolio with a, quote, manager or corporation trustee, and that piece seems to be going away with, under the new proposal, correct me if I'm wrong, but assuming that it is going away, how would that square with the practice that we've been undertaking? Is there just a new interpretation of the charter going on that makes, I don't want to say wrong, but different what we are going to be doing in the future versus what we've been doing in the past?
I would say that the procedure doesn't really change that much in terms of the parameters of everyone's jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. However, to be specific about your question about this trustee, I believe the charter says a corporation trustee, mm-hmm. whatever that is. And we have a lot of instances where it's not a corporate trustee, could be an LLC that we're joining, could be a trust that we are buying units in. And therefore, it's a little bit of a case, as I think Mr. Raymer pointed out too, that the way the charter was drafted way back didn't really envision necessarily what we're getting into at the moment.
Right.
What has been happening is we really have not been looking at the trustee other than to go through, I shouldn't say that, part of the checklist that we go through on these is trying to identify who the trustee is, where they're incorporated, who the custodian is, if we can identify that for the particular trustee, who the auditor is, how the financial statements come through on both the trust, LLC, whatever the entity is, and what those checkpoints are that are in the agreements, how they're set up, and are they reliable, so that there's some kind of financial control that can be checked as we go through with this investment. So to the extent that we in the law department review these agreements, we are going through a checklist of whoever the holder of the securities are and the investor is. We also designate whether or not the investment advisor to the trust is a registered investment advisor, that kind of thing. So we are identifying to a large extent and showing to the BET Law Committee and to the full BET what we have determined from the agreements are financial checkpoints or of the particular entity that's holding our securities and investing them. So, but there has never come a point where the law committee or your full board has said we don't like that particular trustee and we don't think it's reliable. And it's not surprising because it's gone through the process of at least the investment NEPC recommending it and the retirement board going through it. But that's all been a part really of approving the agreements and going and back the agreements to some extent to see who the entities are that are involved.
Okay, so you're saying the legal review, the legal strand of the approval that we had previously conducted
Mm-hmm.
really encompasses sort of both strands, both approval.
We review the prospectus or the private placement memorandum, the investment advisor statement. Sometimes we go to, if it's a Securities and Exchange Commission registered entity, we we try to look into that to some extent. Most of these cases, though, are not registered investments with the Securities and Exchange Commission. They are not registered investment companies because of a lot of times the private placement nature, and really they're designed to be exempt from the Securities and Exchange Commission regulations.
So going forward, does this even have to go to the IAC committee if this is purely a legal review? Just for, take a private equity investment we've made in the last couple of years.
Yeah. I think that, one of the opinions that we gave was one in September, I think, of 2013, and it was really the role of the BET as an oversight board to the retirement board. And what it came down to was this board is responsible for the financial affairs of the town, and it has a role to basically be an oversight that the prudent investor rule is being followed by the investments that are being entered into by the retirement board.
Right.
Because the consequence of the approvals have a consequence if they go in whatever direction on the appropriations that this board has to recommend to fund the retirement system. So that's in a nutshell what that opinion says. It is an oversight. I suppose if it got to the point where this board felt that there was an investment that did not have the right standards for a prudent investment, and the prudent investment rule was not being followed by the retirement board, then it could step in and say we're not approving it. So I think that's really one of the roles, particularly of the investment advisory committee.
Right, and
Yeah.
that, for
Yeah.
me, is the IAC strand, if you will, the prudent investor strand of the approvals that we've been doing previously. So are you saying that still exists under this new proposal?
Yes, I would say that this draft does refer to that opinion dated September 10th, 2013. I suppose it could attach it if need be.
Okay.
But to give you an idea of, well, you're familiar with this because you're on the board last time, but
Yep.
one of the things Mr. Raymer mentioned was some of the recent investments, for example, in GAM and Lumisale Strategic Alpha. And those were where the investments were getting into the derivatives of both funds. One of the funds was even characterized initially as being a hedge fund. And so the question was, under this part of the charter that had been amended by the representative town meeting and then approved by this board, that about, I think it was 25% of the fund now has to be in cash or diversified fixed income securities, and the question was whether or not those derivatives would qualify. We did find that derivatives are part of fixed income investments. They are used as protections against changes in interest rates, and I think that's what the retirement board was trying to do in getting into both of those funds. However, we engaged outside counsel for that fund, and that counsel found that there were issues about compliance of those investments for our investment policy statement. And in the course of our doing research on that, we found that there was a Department of Labor, ERISA letter about standards for derivatives, and also there had been a directive from the insurance commissioner about the use of derivatives for insurance companies. Now, both of those were not direct legal requirements for this Town of Greenwich fund. However, we're still looking into that to see if, to what extent those GAM and Lumisale Strategic Alpha do meet some of those criteria, and that's being worked on now by NEPC.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a situation where we need a both strands of that review, still in the prudent investor and within the ISP, and then the legal review
Yes.
in legal order.
Yeah.
Suppose we have an existing manager, private equity investment, and all we're doing is increasing the dollar amount of the investment. Could we streamline the BET approval process? And I'm sure that Mr. Drake has this in mind, and just go find this in legal order and not do the quote prudent investor ISP strand of approvals?
Well, I would think, if I understand your question, it would basically, and my answer would be that it's been vetted out on all the review of the legal documents, and the only issue would be whether you increase the amount of the investment or not. And I think the way that this board has approved these investments is up to a certain amount.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that in the normal course that would probably require anything by this board other than the increase in the amount. However, if it was, I suppose, part of this board's decision that it was risky, for example, and that they only wanted a certain percentage of the portfolio under a prudent investor rule to be in that, and this would go beyond that, I suppose that would be another way that you'd want to take a look at it.
I see.
Yeah.
And just to add another wrinkle,
Okay.
existing manager, but new product, new investment vehicle, but still within the ISP.
I'm sorry, the what?
Still within the investment policy statement of the
Oh.
retirement board.
I would think that would be new documents, and the agreements refer to incorporation of the prospectus and the acceptance as an investor when you sign the agreement or the subscription into it of the terms of the prospectus, the private placement memorandum, the trust, the articles of incorporation of limited liability company, so on and so forth. So I think that would probably be another legal review of the agreement.
A little more clearly in the legal
Yes.
review
Yes.
bucket.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Gene.
Welcome.
Hang on one second, Mr. Drake. Is there anybody else who hasn't spoken yet? Okay, Mr. Tarkington and Mr. Drake.
May I just, Mr. McLaughlin, can I continue the conversation with you? You know, you did mention the trustee and that it's been part of the review, but quite frankly, in this review, we had not focused on what this section of the charter says about the trustee. So I think in part of our conversation at the last law committee meeting, one of the questions to you was, you know, to date, the law department has been writing the resolution that we then use for approval by this board, and should we specifically mention within that resolution who the custodian or trustee is on that investment? And that's perhaps one of the things that we can talk about at the next meeting. But I wanted to sort of also comment, because you made a comment that we have not questioned the trustees and so forth in the past. I think that that's not a fair statement, that we have certainly, the trustees and custodians on some of these investments are related parties or related banks to do this type of service for these investments. And they have been in states that, I, as a career deal doer, were less familiar with in terms of trustee or custodian law. I think we talked about New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, some of these other locations. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood we weren't just accepting all of this, but we have distinguished on some of these that the pattern might be a little bit different than we might have seen on previous investments.
Yeah, I think
Is that fair?
That's a fair statement.
Thank you.
Mr. Drake?
This discussion's been very helpful. This is not Bill's procedure, it's the committee's procedure. What I would propose is, if we're going to take this issue up again in our February meeting, for all of us, any of us, please, if you have suggestions and recommendations on the text, rewrite it. Change it, and please submit it to us so we can see something, not only the members of our committee, but all 12 of us. If there's something you'd like improved, omitted, or added, please change it and send it to us so we can all consider it. And if a charter change is the right answer, write the change. Let's look at it, so then we, as a board, can look at some proposed solutions. That's a practical thing we can carry out next time. Thank you.
So, before we move on, the law committee meets on the 9th.
Well, we're talking about that, probably the 9th if it works out with the law department, but
So, what I think Mr. Drake is right on point. I think from here, we need feedback, and get it back to the investment advisory committee meeting. Before that meeting, we need that. If you notice tonight on the agenda, that's why I call it discussion/first read. I didn't quite know where people were on this, so it's obviously, it's not a first read, but we need to get on this. As far as charter revision, I will meet with the town attorney on that. But I think we have the law committee, and I think we have the investment advisory on this particular one. As far as the charter change, I have a meeting scheduled with Wayne anyway. I'll bring that up and find out the process. I know the charter change process, but who else would have to opine on that, what the retirement board would do. There's a few more things on that I want to go over before that, so that's probably secondary. But, so I think this was a good discussion, and I think we have to keep working on it. This is, right now, unfortunately, I know the budget starts Monday.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Norton? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, before we conclude a discussion on this, I'd like to speak on this issue as an investment professional in this area, as a registered investment advisor. And what our objective here was to separate the responsibilities between the Law Committee and the Investment Advisory Committee. And the separation is that the Law Committee reviews the legal aspects of the contract, as has been enumerated by counsel tonight, and that the Investment Advisory Committee responsibilities would be in 3 areas. And number 1, obviously, it's complying with the prudent man rule, that it satisfies and is within the provisions and scope of the investment policy. And the third concern that we would have and should have is whether or not the proposed change, whether it's an increase in the amount of risk we're inheriting in a particular investment or a new investment, is whether or not there's concentration in specific areas. But I think the key to this is the investment policy which the retirement board has finally developed. In the 10-plus years I've been on the retirement board, on this board, there's only been within the last, I think, 24 months that they've had an investment policy. And as an investment advisor, the first thing that an investment advisor asks from a client is what is their investment policy, and the advisors work with that. So that the objective that the Investment Advisory Committee has been attempting to take is that approach in which we review the investment policy that has been developed by the Retirement Board, their policy, and it's their responsibility by charter to develop that policy, and that we make certain that the investments that they're proposing that potentially come before this board satisfy the provisions of their investment policy.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, moving on. Review and approval of the BET 2016, should be 2016 to 18 BET reference book. I'll call Mr. Norton from Policy and Procedures and Committee for a quick overview.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe it was last November, the Investment Policy Committee, consisting of Bill Finger and myself, had met, and we made some, I think there were 4 changes that we had made going forward, one of which was the change of date of when the organizational meeting takes place, which we didn't proceed to comply with. And there were some other changes. They were all editorial changes, and the Policy and Procedure Committee at that time recommended those 4 changes.
Okay.
I think they have been incorporated into the new policy manual we now have.
Okay. And then the new committee hasn't met this year yet.
No, it has not.
Okay. So, this, let me just give some background before we get going. This handbook has come quite a long way. Somebody's beeping. This book has come a long way since I first got on the BET. It's sort of a handbook. It's got contact information. It's got pertinent sections of the charter, municipal code. It covers everything from that we think so far at major object codes in the back. We we think it covers everything. A lot of stuff that, we covered in our orientation meeting, I think, we pulled some of that out of here. So this is our biennial policy to adopt our handbook. Changes, there's still some changes that need to be in. There's a new page you saw at your desk that has to be inserted for the old page. Obviously, Elaine couldn't do that until our organization.
There was a page at our desk, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, there's a handout right here, which is the committee assignments. The committees, obviously that, because we didn't have them when she was printing up the books, so we hadn't met yet. So with that discussion,
Mr.
Mr. Raymer.
I have, as the body knows, I had circulated an email originally back in October, but I revised it on the 13th of January, proposing 4 amendments. I don't know how the chair would like to do it. I suppose there may be others who have amendments, proposed amendments too, just to deal with them chronologically front to back, or how would the chair like to deal with these?
I've recognized you, but if I may, your amendment number 1,
Yes,
if I just may share something with you, which you may want to consider.
yes.
We discussed that in caucus and weren't really sure what we thought with the conversations going on about the document we were just working on, that might apply somewhat in that document. So we were going to actually sort of entertain a motion to hold off on that one for about a month. Not for or against, just because we thought some of that has to do with the last item we were just discussing.
Yeah, I do see that there's a connection. May I speak to that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, please,
Is this the appropriate time?
please.
May I refer the body then to page 18 of the appendix of the book that you have before you? On page 18, you'll see at the bottom of the page the infamous section 208A of the charter. And if I can ask the body to scan 6 lines down the line, maybe it's, 6 lines down, the line begins, shall invest and reinvest the funds. Does everybody see where I am? And then in the middle of that line comes an or. And I'm going to read the language that follows the or. It says one of the alternatives, or the retirement board may deliver all or part of the funds and securities of the retirement system to a corporation trustee designated by the Board of Estimate and Taxation. The designating of that entity is done by the Board of Estimate and Taxation. If I now may refer you back to page 10 of the first section. The first section is entitled Organization and Powers. That sentence reads, low down on the page under Management of Funds, the Retirement Board will designate. That's an inadvertent error. That is supposed to read, the Board of Estimate and Taxation will designate a corporation trustee. If you intend this section to be following section 208A, which is in fact what the parenthesis says you're citing to. So I think the scrivener of this has done just an inadvertent error. When they meant to say the BET, they said the Retirement Board. If you make those words read Retirement Board, since you're citing to Section 208A, if you wanted to actually say what Section 208A says, you need to change those words to read Retirement Board, read Board of Estimate and Taxation.
What page is it? So it's 10 of
On
Everybody
page 10 of the first section, low down on the page, the amendment I'm proposing, the heading there reads Management of Funds. And right now, the book says, the Retirement Board shall designate a corporation trustee for the safekeeping and investment. And it cites to Section 208A. But if you go to Section 208A, which you find on page 18 of the appendix of your book, at the back of the book, you see that no, the words say that the BET will designate.
If I may for 1 second, Gene?
Yeah,
Are you following this?
I am. Yeah, I think this gets into the discussion we had about the 2 different parts of 208A. I don't have an argument with what Mr. Raymer said about legality of it. The difference between the two sections seems to be who actually does the investment, whether it's retirement board or the corporation trustee.
Respectfully, Gene?
Yeah.
The sentence
Yeah.
says, the question here is who designates the corporation trustee? Page 10 says
Yeah.
the retirement board shall designate a corporate trustee.
Yes, I think what I'm trying to illustrate is in 208A, the difference between the two sections about investment is in the first section, the first part of 208A, it's the retirement board that does the investment. And in the second part, it's the corporation trustee
And in the
that does the
first part,
investment.
there is not the designation of a
Yeah,
corporation
right,
trustee. The
right.
designation of a corporation trustee
Yeah.
is a concept that arises only after the "or" in the second part.
Right.
And the charter is clear that the entity that does the designating is the BET, not the retirement board.
If it's the corporation trustee that's doing the investment.
Yeah, and so accordingly, what we have on page 10 of our organization and powers is incorrect, especially if it's going to cite to section 208A, which it does.
So, Mr. Rimmer has a motion to make the amendment on page 10?
Yeah, there's no second at this point.
Second.
Okay, seconded. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, within Robert's rules, it's perfectly within the authority of the body to take an item before it and choose to postpone it to a later meeting. If my assisting with what you were saying, I mean, I take no umbrage at that.
No, I'm,
So moved.
Yeah.
you're in favor of this change?
Postponing.
Okay.
So moved.
Whatever.
Okay. All those in favor of,
Just to make the motion to postpone.
I did.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Second.
all right, we have a second. All those in favor of postponing this one item, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Thank you.
I've been alone before.
At 11 to 1.
Yes. On that particular item, I think Mr. Norton, you and Mr. Raymer need to really make sure we're there. Okay, moving on. Mr. Raymer,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
you have submitted revisions. I did not receive any other revisions from any other member, so therefore I will be calling on you.
Okay. I'm then going to move to my amendment number 2. My amendment number 2 addresses matter page 18 of the first tab, again, organization and powers. The general subject matter here is the ability of members, if any, of the members of the BET to add an item to the agenda of a meeting. And I have proposed adding a single sentence at the end of the 6th paragraph. The effect of that sentence would be, I'll read it in just a second if you like, but the effect of that will be that at the request of 4 members of the BET, communicated at least 24 hours prior to the meeting to meet FOI, 4 members can achieve having an item added to the agenda. The provisions right now on page 18 provide that the chair sets the agenda, and there's no provision for members to add an item to the agenda. By way of discussion, well, actually, is there a second to my motion?
Second.
May I continue with discussion, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
I pointed out, if I may, just by way of an oddity, that our existing reference book right now provides that 4 members can call a special meeting. So an item which, let's say in a hypothetical, I had wished to add to the agenda of a regular meeting, under the present provision, even if I had the company of 3 other members, I can't add it to the agenda of a regular meeting, but I can cause the body to hold a special meeting on my item of agenda. Isn't that silly? Wouldn't it have been more logical just that the same 4 members could have added the item to the agenda of a regular meeting? Further, by way of an analogy, I point out that at page 25, we already do provide that half the members of any existing standing committee can add an item to the agenda of that committee. So, for example, 2 members of the Investment Advisory Committee or 1 member of the Law Committee could add an item to the agenda of that committee. By way of analogy, gee, if half the members of a committee, or let's say 2 members of one of those committees, can put an item on the agenda of a committee, why cannot 4 members place the item on the agenda of the BET generally? I've used the 4-person standard, A, because it matched the provision that we have on bringing about a special meeting. And then secondly, I thought it provides some appropriate protection for the body against a chaotic process of just 1 member, or even just 2 members, incessantly adding items to an agenda. I thought if it rises to the point that 4 members wish a matter to be heard publicly, gee, that's enough members that really it ought to be heard publicly. That, Mr. Chairman, is my discussion of this item. The sentence that I propose to add, I guess I should read it. At the end of the 6th paragraph, I would add a sentence which reads, quote, "Items may be added to the agenda at the request of 4 members of the BET communicated to the chairman at least 24 hours prior to the meeting," close quote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this item was presented to the Policy and Procedures Committee at our meeting back in November, and we voted 1-1, in effect, not to support this. I have a personal concern with this item, and it involves a special meeting in which we need 7 members to hold a special meeting. And 4 members can add an item to a special meeting agenda, and in effect, pass an item that was not intended to be at the special meeting.
I respectfully disagree, Mr. Chairman. Freedom of Information specifies that when a meeting is called as a special meeting, that body is entitled to take up no other matter except the declared matter for which the special meeting was called. And that's a provision of the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Show of hands. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That item has failed, 6-6. Moving on, Mr. Raymer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I can interject, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Raymer, if that would be all right. I would like to make a motion to modify what Mr. Raymer has just proposed and move that 6 members of the BET communicating to the chairman at least 24 hours prior to the meeting could add an item to the agenda.
I would second that motion.
And the reason being consistent with what Mr. Raymer had pointed out with our rules with respect to standing committees, where half of those members can add an item to an agenda. I think this practice would be consistent at the full BET level. I think the second reason would be it really codifies what our practice has been. I think we've been very collaborative and welcoming when one party feels particularly strongly about bringing an item. The most recent example, of course, is an alternative set of guidelines, which for the past several years, the chairman has welcomed or allowed that agenda item to be added. So it sort of codifies the sort of collaboration that we've enjoyed in the last few years.
Further discussion? I'll opine on this. There's a few different ideas going on here. Special meetings are special meetings and are limited to a topic specific. Regular meetings are regular meetings. And I would say the last thing this board wants to ever do is have an item put on 24 hours, which potentially avoids any chance of a committee structure, which we live in, number one. Number two, that it can really prevent us from having material, quote, our homework being done. And the BET has, under Robert's rules, the ability to add an item on the agenda under 2/3 of the members present to add an item, which we've done in the past when something's come up, and it's usually something a little easier in nature, which if we're all here, that would be 8. If one was here, 2/3, we can do the math. So for that reason, I for those of you who have not seen what it takes to build an agenda and have the organization and the material ready, you might have a slightly different approach to this. But with that, all those.
No, sorry. Just if I may. First of all, I want to echo something that was said by Ms. Kiernan, and that is that yes, indeed, it has been the habit and custom of the chair to extend putting onto the agenda items that we've asked. I can never remember an occasion when in the end a matter did not see the light of day because of that. I want to be sure that I don't look as if I'm making an accusation that things are being hidden from public view by virtue of this. Nevertheless, I do want to be careful to be sure that it's clear that when you have a 6-person standard, which has been proposed by Ms. Kiernan, among the settings there is possibly a setting in which the full caucus of one particular party has made a specific request that an item be heard. And the response that Mr. Mason was proposing that, well, there's always the opportunity to add an item with a 2/3 vote, you're effectively saying that even if a full caucus wants something heard, it won't be heard unless at least 2 members of the other caucus are prepared to agree as well. And I find that a troubling concept. Secondly, to the concern, rightfully, that the chair pointed out of, gee, wouldn't it be a pity if we're being forced to entertain matters on 24 hours notice? The 24-hour provision was only to comply with the minimum standards set forth by FOI. And as we've already seen with the handling of the first item of my amendments, it's always within the power of this body to take an item that's properly before the body and by majority vote to choose to postpone it to a later meeting. And that requires only a simple majority, not a 2/3 majority. And I thought maybe those observations should have been added, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
We're voting on the amendment now, yes?
Yes,
Yeah.
The item you're voting on is Ms. Kiernan's
Motion.
motion to amend.
No, I'm not amending. It's a new motion.
It's a new motion, but
Yeah.
instead of the 4, it's 6. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That motion has failed.
There's certain consistency.
Mr. Raymer?
Lastly, Mr. Chairman, I'm shifting now to the policy and practices section, which is the second tab in the book. Art, I'm going to sheepishly say aloud to you that as we go forward as a policy and procedures manual, I may wish to revert back to pagination that started at page 1 and ended with pagination right through, rather than separate numbers for each section, because I think it was a little easier before when the pagination didn't start all over again with each section. But anyway, on this particular subject, I'm on page 5. But I'm actually in a different place. I want to refer you back, if I may, to page, just a second. Yes, page 7 of the appendix. Would you kindly go to the last tab, which is the appendix, page 7? When you get there, would you please find section 22, subsection C, and focus your eyes on the last sentence, which in a moment I'm going to read aloud, adding an emphasis where I think it's appropriate. Is everybody in the same place with me? The last sentence reads as follows. 7 affirmative votes of the board, meaning the Board of Estimate and Taxation, 7 affirmative votes of the board shall be required to determine the proposed appropriations. To my mind, the word determine is important. We presently have provision which appears, now I'm going back to page 5 of the second tab, second paragraph from the bottom. And we have a provision here, and I want to be sure that I'm clear when I say to you, we have a provision here which enjoys the support of a formal opinion from the town attorney's office. I don't think we have, or do we have, yes, we have that opinion on page 53, do I recall that? Just a second. Yeah, page 51. We received not an opinion letter, but a memorandum from the town attorney, which supports what's in the book, but I nevertheless want to have the audacity to say that I think that it is misplaced. What the provision now says, second paragraph from the bottom on page 5, what the provision now says is that when the BET entertains the budget that comes to it from the Budget Committee, that the BET may entertain motions to amend or modify. I suppose that means also, therefore, to delete any of the appropriations which are contained in the budget as it comes to the BET from the Budget Committee. And then it says that by a mere, I've added the word mere, by a mere majority vote, the BET can either approve or disapprove any such motion. That is to say, by a mere majority vote, the BET can take an item in the budget that has come to it from the Budget Committee and can strike that item or reduce it to a de minimis sum, or to change its terms and provisions. And I am positing to this board that when the charter says that it requires 7 affirmative votes to determine the appropriations, you are violating that provision when you say that a mere majority, not 7 affirmative votes, a mere majority can take an item in that budget and reduce it to a de minimis sum. Because when you have done that, you have effectively determined that appropriation. And so I believe that this provision violates Section 22C of the Charter, and I have therefore proposed replacement language. It's a little longer, and I won't read it aloud unless somebody wishes me to. You have it before you in writing. But the gist of it is to say that, no, a motion to amend the budget as it comes to you from the Budget Committee can be amended only upon 7 affirmative votes because it determines an appropriation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raymer. I imagine there's a second for this.
Second.
Okay. Mr. McLaughlin, I've seen this movie. I've seen this movie before, but I like reruns occasionally. So help us through this.
All right. There was an opinion that was given by the town attorney, John Wayne Fox, on this. And to summarize it, it was basically that amendments to the budget appropriations could be passed by a majority of those voting, and did not require the 7 votes that's required for approval of the appropriation to the RTM. And I think what this amendment is doing is it's going to require, in order for you to make an amendment to any particular budget item before the final vote, you'd have to have 7 votes in order to make that amendment. That's not your practice, as I understand it. Your practice is to make amendments by a majority vote of the items as they come before you, and then you take a vote on the final proposed budget, which requires the 7 affirmative votes required by the charter. So that's the opinion of the town attorney. This change in your procedure would go against that. There are some arguments that Mr. Fox made in support of it in terms of Robert's rules that support amendments to motions by a majority, not necessarily a specified number of votes. Also, one of the arguments that he or support that he gave was that it would give a great deal of power to the Budget Committee and lessen the ability of the full board to change what was recommended by the Budget Committee. So, I mean, I think you're all familiar with this. If you're not, I certainly welcome any questions. I've gone over the opinion. I was reminded by John Wayne Fox that he had issued this opinion, so that I read it. So that's basically, I think, you're all familiar with it, but if you have any questions, I'll certainly answer them.
Mr. Norton, Ms. Vice.
Gene, it's my recollection that Wayne's opinion separated line items from a department item, budget. And that by a mere majority, we could reduce a line item, but we could not reduce, at the end, voting on a department's budget, it had to be by 7 votes.
I think what, as I understand the procedure, you don't do it by department. Don't you do my understanding is at the end of
Major object
everything.
code.
Right.
You vote on all the major object codes as they've been amended at the end, and that does require the 7
7
votes
votes.
to get on as the proposed budget. I think you used to refer to the Budget Committee's recommendation as the recommended budget, am I correct in that? And then what was submitted to the RTM was the proposed budget. So when you're acting on the recommended budget by major object code, you're going through and making amendments to that, and then on your proposed budget, that's the 7 votes for all the items.
And I thought he
Yeah.
separated the two.
I can look through that and maybe call you back, but in my fast reading, I didn't see that up, but I can call you if I see it.
So,
Yeah.
so for everybody in sort of our new members and TV land out there, the Budget Committee, pick a hypothetical. The Budget Committee wants to reduce $50 from the law department budget. Sorry, Gene. And their vote is 2-2.
I'm beginning to think we should reduce it by more than that.
Here we go. Well, at least we're laughing. So the Budget Committee wants to do something, it's 2-2. There's no tie-breaking vote in the committees. So therefore, when the item comes before us, it is not modified in any way. So the people who wanted to modify it might make a motion to reduce by $50, and people who are against it, there'll be a discussion of why that was. We as a full board can break that with a simple majority, yes or no. But at the end, so we can do that throughout the budget. At the end of the budget, 7 people on this board have to vote for the budget that goes to the RTM. And what they did, that's very interesting if you read some of the old special acts, is that if we don't approve a budget by a recommended level of appropriations, I didn't say budget, a recommended level of appropriations, if we don't do that by 7 affirmative votes on or before a certain date, the budget from the previous year, the operational budget from the previous year takes effect.
More or less.
So that's really how the charter goes. So I understand what Mr. Raymer's trying to do. The town attorney has opined. It's here, you have it. It's back in 11. I can't believe it was back in 11. It seems like it was yesterday. You sure we haven't done this a couple times since?
Well, we've done it a couple of times since,
Okay.
yeah.
I was just thinking of that rerun.
Not successfully yet.
So what I would say is, for me, it's very difficult. As somebody once said to me, once you start not listening to the town attorney, you're open for lots of issues. I remember hearing that somewhere. So with that said, further discussion on and I want to just say, this is Mr. Raymer's amendment number 4 in the package that was out.
Yeah.
Further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 4, yeah, abstaining. I have 4, 8, 0. Mr. Raymer, you did skip Amendment 3.
I'm sorry.
I'm here to help.
No. Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I must be getting old.
I'll pay for that one later, probably.
You may, yes. If I can direct your attention to paragraph 22, to page 22 of the first section, Organization and Powers. In my words, not the words that are written here, the top paragraph on the page presently says that the membership of the committees of this body, both caucuses, shall be selected by the chair, but the chair shall consult with the minority caucus leader. I've proposed replacement language for that first paragraph, and the replacement language would turn that around, would say that each caucus will select its committee members, but each will consult with the other caucus in making those selections. The obvious point being that at the end of the day, we think that the membership on committees that come from a given caucus should be the business of that caucus, and that caucus should have the last say. And I say that with the greatest respect for our chair, who I think has handled these appointments extremely well, but the principle disturbs me that I have a chair of one caucus selecting the committee assignments from the other caucus, which seems to me to be inappropriate.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Norton?
Policy and Procedure Committee considered this item when we met back in November, and our vote was 1-1 at that time.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion has failed.
I do thank the body for its time. We'll discuss it again in 2 years.
Somehow, I believe that.
Yeah.
Somehow, I believe that. Does anybody else have any amendments? Now, I would just, real quickly, after tonight, there's a few pages right below where Mr. Raymer was just talking about our standing committees. That is to be revised. I think specifically, we have these going on, but we're having some revisions, and now we have the assignment, so it'll just be the committee's liaison. With that said, can I get a motion that the BET handbook, reference book, sorry.
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, could we just clarify, just for the record, what is not included in the motion? So the motion is the Policies and Procedures Manual, except the committee and liaison list on page 22.
Yes.
The,
It's one other place, I think, also in the membership directory, I think they put that also.
great, and then the initial discussion on the designation of corporation trustee by the BET, we're putting that off.
Yeah, that we're going to put off,
And then the proposal by Mr. Drake and the IC committee.
yes.
Thank you.
And by the way, this is, it's always a living document, and, so the item's been moved and seconded. Discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Raymer?
I just wish the prerogative to say that I will vote in favor of the adoption within the limits of what Ms. Kiernan had said, but I do so without waiving objection on the amendments that I recently made unsuccessfully.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you. Okay. Number 9, old business. Early in the term, I always put the BET calendar just for all those that are concerned. September, our full meeting is the same night as the RTM. As we get closer, in case I have to move that meeting an hour earlier, just if there's something for us that has to go to the RTM. That's something we ran into last term, so I'm trying to fix that a little bit. Item number 10, approval of the regular BET minutes. So the first minutes are our BET organizational minutes for January 11th. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved by Ms. Turkey, second by Mr. Raymer. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, the next one.
Pardon me, but on the second one, we have a word change that I missed. And so on the December 15th minutes, we want to add the word bond, which I omitted. Ms. Tarkington brought to my attention. Want to add that word on page 5 under the new business where we speak of the approval of the management letter for the year ending June 30th, 2015. Let me just read the sentence. It's the middle sentence of that paragraph on page 5, the top of page 5. This has to do with deficiencies in internal controls. Here's the sentence. Mr. Norton also mentioned management's response to each A, tracking of sewer assessment bond receivables, B, compensated absences tracking, et cetera, and C. So, sorry, it's just a word that I omitted, and I'd propose that we consider the insertion of that word. Thank you, Ms. Tarkington, And on that basis, consider the minutes that are before you for December 15th.
So I so move those minutes.
Move as an amendment. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 1, 2.
Abstaining for not being here. Yeah, that would.
So
should be-
it's
Thank you.
8,
Thank you, Bill.
so it's 804.
Yes.
4 members have to abstain.
Right, thanks, everybody.
Okay, Mr. Drake, do you have anything else?
No, nothing else, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Norton?
No, sir.
I have 3 items. One of them I think I might get some points for. So Tom Byrne, Peter Tessie and I, as per charter, met. There's a vacancy on the retirement board. The retirement board, you can not serve on any other board or commission in the town. So there was a vacancy, and Joe Pellegrino is now a member of the retirement board, finishing out the term that Mr. Simon had. So that's official, and he's been notified, and we had 3 candidates for that. One of the candidates was from backcountry. One of the candidates is well-known RTM and what have you. They all did an outstanding job. We've met with them, so we're in good shape. We're back to full there. Monday evening starts the budget committee. Presentation of the budgets, Board of Ed, First Selectman, and then the public hearing begins. So they'll be off on that. And I've worked with Elaine. I don't know if Peter Minarski knows this yet, but certainly we've had a lot of meetings where this isn't enough, and I've got some members who are willing to use this on me to have something to eat during our meetings. And I didn't take the threat literally, but there's certainly an outcry to change some of the refreshments at some of the meetings and stuff. The budget deliberations all have that. So when we get a certain level agenda, I'm going to do something for that. I got in a lot of trouble at the orientation. Of course, it's by the people who can eat anything, and me, I eat something like 8 a pound. So with that said, we'll make some changes on that. But other than that, we're off and running.
Mr. Chairman, before you adjourn the meeting, I do want to make reference to the fact that David Ormsby has, as of this evening, retired as the chairman of the Nathaniel Witherell Board after 10 years service. And I think that although we have had many difficulties with the finances at Witherell, I think the town of Greenwich, and this board included, owes a great deal of thanks to Dave Ormsby for his length of service. It's my understanding that they met this evening, and it's my understanding that Larry Simon is succeeding him as chair of that board.
Wow, that's good news. But Mr. Ormsby led that construction. He was there, as you know. It was amazing. What a,
Terrific.
what a commitment to the town. Incredible. I'd like to know who roped him into that job.
Is it?
He did an enormous job up there. But with that said,
May we have a motion to adjourn?
all those in favor? Aye. Opposed?